let's go on. So we are going to talk about cybersecurity, and in many senses, we will be in the continuity of the first discussion, I think. Let me challenge you a little. In my opinion, what I see in cybersecurity in Europe is... Oh,
go ahead.
Don't worry, don't worry. What I see is that we have, in every country, many good startups cyber. In terms of, product creation, ideas, dynamism, creativity, everything is there. In terms of technical set, technical knowledge, no issue. That compares with the best US designers, the US companies. The problem is that we have very few big ones in Europe. If I name big ones, by the way, they are not in Western Europe. They are a little in Germany. Now you have in Germany 3 companies in the range of 100 million euros. That's not the case in France. It's lower. In Eastern Europe, you have companies such as EZ in Slovakia, for instance, which makes something like 700 million euros. They are not known. In Western Europe, nearly no one knows them. But they are much bigger. So that's an issue. I do not say that size makes, certainly not. But at the end of cybersecurity, other capital. So size is also an element of the equation. So one of the questions we need to tackle is how to speed up the journey to true champion. The other also element of discussion is how to do the best link between public research and the industry. I do not say this does not happen. There are links between public research and industry. They are different in different countries. If I take the country I know best, is France. 20 years ago, there was no link. Zero. Better than that, there was fear between industry and public research. Olivier will not blame me to say that. The things have evolved, that we can probably do much better, and I think Dutch experience is very interesting on that respect. So I would like us to discuss these questions. Each time I will ask a question and designate one of you, because I'm sorry, I'm a little bullish. I have chosen the people that will answer my question, but you can all speak. You have some seconds to introduce yourselves the first time you answer a question. So my first question is about what about the predominance of US vendors? Is it only due to better marketing and huger financial means, or is there something? To give an example, a discussion I had with Henri Dagrin, you don't know him, he's the general delegate for CIGRE, which is a big association of CIOs of French large companies and large administration. And his answer is, technically speaking, it's about the same level. The problem is, when you are a CIO, what you don't want is to have to integrate different products yourself. You want to have someone say, hey guy, come to me, it will be a one-stop shopping. I will solve all your cybersecurity problems. So this element of integration, of having products better integrated, it's something important. How also easy to administrate products. American products are set more easy to administrate than European ones. So is it really an issue? Can we do better in Europe? I would like to ask the question to Octavia and Cody. So whichever wants to start.
Well, I think Octavia first, and then we can switch over.
Hello? I don't completely agree with that idea of one-stop shopping being available from American vendors, because I don't know one product who is that altogether within cybersecurity. I do know a lot of products who in the vertical market have very large scale. So I think that's a bit of a maybe, well, let's be a bit critical laziness of the CIOs thinking, well, let's just buy that one place and then we'll have everything together. I do agree that there is a big advantage in investment and development which has been done. You can compare that with the advantage of what we call cloud technicalities and tooling, which is available only in the American big tech market because it has been developed forever and with big investment money. And we don't have that in Europe, but I still believe in the possibilities of going back to making made in Europe products. But I really, really don't think if we ever will be able to reach that kind of scalability which the Americas and Asia will do just by the sake of numbers.
Okay, well, thank you. So for a little bit of background, as you can probably sense, I am an American. So I am the bad guy here. So I am an American CEO running a Dutch business, right? So I run EclecticIQ out of Amsterdam, which we do global cyber threat intelligence services. We are a product company. And we are about 10 years old, and I became CEO earlier this year. So that in itself, I think, indicates that there's a bit of interest, at least from our investors, some of which were on this stage earlier, in trying to accelerate and sort of blend the US culture with the European culture. But I do think that in terms of your question, Dominique, it's so it's a mixture of factors. For me, it's certainly about the growth creation gap. So I don't say investment gap because that was discussed at length earlier, and I think everyone, as somebody else mentioned, everyone understands that. But there's a value creation gap that we see in the European Investment Fund report that Sylvia mentioned, that we see in other reports, where even if you normalize for investment capital, at IPO, you see dramatically lower figures for the European companies. I think one report said 13.5 times lower valuations. So there's a value creation gap. And I think that's because of a mixture of factors. One of them is a very uncomfortable topic, which is European labor law, where it is, as everyone here knows with this audience, in the US, you hire fast and fire fast, right? Here, there's a little bit more of a humane approach to labor law, to firing. And for the record, I think that's a good thing. But that means that you have to be very selective about who you bring on board. And that also slows down your innovation potential, let's just say, and also further demonstrates that this is not a risk-taking working culture, right? So I think that you could unravel that to a broader aversion to risk in general, which has good things and bad things. And then another factor, which somebody mentioned during the earlier session a little bit, is the national security pipeline. And this is something I don't hear people talk about on similar panels, because usually you always hear about the growth gap, you always hear single market and so on and so forth, which are great points. But in cybersecurity, the US and the UK have extremely strong national security pipelines. I come from the US government, so I worked for the National Security Agency and some other agencies, and probably, I think I've seen stats, something like 45% of US cybersecurity pros came from US national security. And when I search for highly knowledgeable in domain talent, I find that the UK and the US have the greatest number of fish, right? And that's because there's a much larger defense pool. So I think that's something that you might see change slowly over time, maybe starting in France. So then you have the restrictions with the other French challenges we've seen in the French market. which we can discuss more. And I think I'll leave it there, and let's get to the next question. But each of those unravels into a broader topic.
Thanks, Cody and Olivier. I think great thoughts. When I was seeing the question, it made me think as well, like, hey, but what's indeed going on? Why do the US usually win and we as Europe stay smaller? And I fully agree on the, technically I think we are equally smart. But if, my conclusion was it should be something cultural. And Cody, you very well addressed the topic of risk. Here in Europe, you can live without any risk. Education is for free, healthcare is for free, security is for free. We pay high taxes, of course the bill is paid, but we are not used to thinking business models in this space. And if I think what is the US doing really well is thinking in terms of business model, value creation, what is the market model, that the product market fit that really makes it work. And we have to start thinking about this probably when you got into business. But the rest of your life, you do not have to think about it because it's thought out for you. And I think especially cybersecurity is quite a strong societal challenge. And again, we are not used to think in terms of money making and business models for these kind of products. And that's a cultural problem that we have that makes it really great to live in Europe. Because to underline, I've lived for 4 years in Singapore, which adopted quite some measures from the US and has also a great tax scheme from our perspective. But you have to pay yourself for everything: security, health, education. And here we are used to live for free. And that's the cultural barrier. We are not used to think in business models for societal challenge. And actually it was also, I was thinking about this point before, the list that Eddie mentioned before, it was lacking, think of terms of really get to your product market fit. We tend to think like, but we have the best technology. We have a great product. We are building the P2000 video recorder. And we all knew why VHS won. That was the best business model because they had another part of the segment of the offerings. I'm sorry for my reminding in this, but
sorry. In France, to come back to this example, we have also a president that talked much about AI, but that does not follow suit at the same speed that more or less does, but because everyone does now, not specifically because the president has said it should be done. So there is this element of being quick at adopting innovation, which we try to be rather slower. Maybe also an element because you talked about national security that comes to public order, procurement. Would it make sense to push one thing which some people call innovation contracts? The idea is, I don't know exactly in Netherlands, but in France you have rules in the public markets. So you have to make tenders, you have to be sure that competition has been respected and so on and so forth. And once someone, it was in 2016, someone said, when it comes to innovation, it doesn't work exactly that way, we should do something. But that person at the time was not yet president of the Republic, because it was Emmanuel Macron that said that. And he said, so we will have a threshold up to 100,000 euros. Public purchaser, public buyers can make exception to the rule, which is normally to have tenders. That doesn't work. Or maybe it has worked, but to a small extent. So the idea of innovation contract is to have public bodies. It can be, for instance, the defense or some other ones, saying, okay, you company, you have something that interests me, but it's not yet a product. For the moment, it's more an idea. We will give you 1 year to develop your product. If at the end of this year, I say 1 year, it can be 18 months. Take it like you want. If at the end of this period, the product is really there on the table and it complies with what we have decided together, then we will warrant, let's say, 4 years of contract to a minimum level of so much. And that's very different because what startup needs more than funding, I would say, is contracts. Contracts it's the leverage of a contract is much higher than having something more in your equity. Of course, equity is important, but contract is more. So, is this something innovation contracts? Is it a good idea to try to push? Would it make sense?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm Dimitri from Quantum Gateway Foundation, a startup in cybersecurity here in Amsterdam. Those kind of innovation contracts are actually happening in the Netherlands. And I think there's this NATO call or funding that's also they have the headquarters here in Amsterdam, where you can create and build those proposals, and you can get some funding out of them to do prototyping, etc. But the whole thing in this is that those kind of proposals and subsidies are also mostly taken by big consortia of the Airbus, Thales kind of companies, because they have those lobbyists. They know upfront what kind of calls are coming, and sometimes those calls are kind of like written towards their kind of line of thinking. And then suddenly you only have 2 or 3 months to build your proposal as a startup, create your consortium, and send in these proposals. And in that sense, it's not working. And I can understand that it's something we need to do and we need to push and try. And as a startup, we tried a couple of times, and some proposals we just, we tried and we started writing a proposal, but we stopped after 5-6 weeks because we noticed that it's just not going to work. We don't have enough time. So then my question is, what are we going to do about that? Can we create some kind of innovation projects or subsidy calls where those big companies can't send in a proposal to avoid, getting those proposals out of the hands of the startups?
Those exist. You have in Europe, you have calls. SMEs get 75% paid, and the rest 50%. So that reduces the attractiveness of the call.
So I understand what the problem of the big bureaucracy administration is before even start thinking of writing down a proposal in one.
True, but these are the incentives. At least they create to get these fundings at the SMEs and not at the big part.
Is it really working?
Oh, at least we have one. So.
But you also have the SBIRS, which is also for small business only. And NATO Diana program is only for startups and scale-ups.
Yeah, I think that these do exist because, so for us, we're a little bit bigger, but we're not huge, But I think that the initial question of, is this a good idea? Well, I do think if it can help a gentleman like you, then it is. But when you're scaling, I'm actually not sure. And that's because, we don't really need contracts. We need customers. And we need to scale. So there are only so many European governments or world governments that you can sell to, right? So actually, I think that, so just to be clear, we have numerous European government customers, and we are very proud of that, right? And we help to safeguard European nations and also some Asian customers, and actually US too, by the way, one, in the US government. But for broader scale, to really break out and be that sort of European global leader, you have to get enterprise customers at volume. And when you're servicing governments, you have this albatross around your neck with the reporting requirements, with the very long sales cycles, and you really run the risk of actually becoming a sort of de facto government contractor. So I think there's a serious risk when you're scaling of relying too much on these sorts of contracts and losing sight of the real product or service that you are trying to sell as a European leader and sort of break out of that European jail, so to speak.
So maybe do you want to comment on that again? Because I'm going to go to another kind of question.
The only thing I wanted to add, one of the, so my company, CFLW Cyber Strategies, we deliver a dark monitor as a solution. It's a platform where you have a subscription, and the first tier subscription is just below the tender threshold. So it's 25,000 euros. We get in, they like it, and then they have the problem. But we really try to turn around the problem of procurement, like being attractive for procurement. So we try to change the problem in our benefit. And as soon as they have a problem and long procurement cycle, well, you can take care of it. Many clients nowadays said, okay, we go for a 5-year contract, then we're done with it. We do it once, it's painful, and then we're done. Another thing we do see more and more is just ask what is the framework partner they have. Because they have framework agreements, the governments, where they can spend much more than the tender thresholds, and we go through them. And in many cases, we just immediately ask, like, who is your framework partner? Can we go through them? Because the procurement is company to company, and they have their internal range. So it took a little while. But, I think we're getting smarter and smarter to also get it done efficiently, because that's the whole crappy thing with these tender processes. It takes so long to get it along.
Okay, let's move to another set of questions about regulation. So in Europe, we have more and more regulations about cybersecurity. Well, we have indirect regulations, as the Service Act. I don't remember what is the D. Digital. Yes, of course. Digital Service Act, but we have also regulation directly heading to cybersecurity, such as NIS2, DORA, Cyber Resilience Act, and so on and so forth. Is that something helpful? Is that something that really you, as players, can ground on? Will that change? I know at the discussion, I think it was with Harold on that. Will that definitely, let's say in 2-3 years from now, definitely change the landscape and the way orders are passed? So whoever would, maybe Harold, if you want to start.
I'm
on
more
this
than
one.
willing to do so, and the answer is yes. And I can also elaborate. So the entire, what we of course observe is that until recently, typically, if you talk about cybersecurity, it's very often information security or typically network security. For a lot of companies, they don't even think about the cybersecurity of their own products. What you see, thanks to the, let's say, the Cyber Resilience Act, but also the Product Liability Directive that has changed, is that companies are becoming liable for the consequences of lack of cybersecurity of their own products. Whether it's a smart TV or a car or a boat or a helicopter that I cannot afford, if something goes wrong, they are now responsible, which until now is not the case. So for a lot of companies, they are basically, how should I put it nicely? They are doing doo-doo in their pants because they basically realize that the products that they have been developing over 20, 30, 40 years, that are basically having a technical debt from here to Tokyo, suddenly they're responsible for the cybersecurity of a sieve, which has so many vulnerabilities that you don't even need very good hackers to get in. And now suddenly they are vulnerable. And that means that for a lot of companies, suddenly they have a very strong interest in cybersecurity. But then, of course, we have an interesting problem you already addressed before. We're not only short of cybersecurity professionals, even more, we're short of system and software engineering professionals who actually know more about cybersecurity than just how to write the word, which is typically none. So there is a huge problem, and that's not specifically in the Netherlands, that holds in the US, that holds in Europe, that holds basically everywhere. At least where these kind of new rules and regulations hold. And that is typically in Europe, but also with the executive order, what was it, 14208 or something like that, also in the US. Which means that typically companies that also supply medical equipment to the US, they have to do a little bit more on cybersecurity than they used to do before. And yes, because of the medical directive regulation, they have kind of an exemption, but they also realize that that will not hold for very long. So it's an interesting, let's say, stimulus for cybersecurity getting an extra boost in attention in the normal world.
There could be a way to challenge that, but I prefer to have before your opinion. Anyone else speaking about regulation?
You want to speak? Yeah, because I don't want to be the only. I don't want to speak too much, but yeah, I think I would very much echo what you said, Harold. And you also see it in the U.S., right? So this is on both sides of the ocean, where it's theoretically, in a, you could say, Machiavellian business sense, good for us, right? Because if you, for us, if you are required to have cyber threat intelligence services, well, by all means, we'll sell that to you, right? So I think that does stimulate this industry. Of course, that's not the intent behind it, and I truly don't think it is. But it has the effect that there's an economic value gap that entrepreneurs fill. So I think in that regard, it is very helpful for us. But what's interesting to me is that we had an excellent session earlier, and I thought there was an excellent panel. But you heard the term AI mentioned maybe, I think, 2 or 3 times at most, right? But it's not just hype. This is going to change our world, and I think that it's notable that the EU or that ChatGPT just released advanced voice in the US yesterday, I think, and it's not available in the EU. Not clear when it will be, and it's because the EU AI Act does not allow AI software that can detect human emotion, right? So there's a very interesting phenomenon where, to illustrate the value of European regulations, everyone knows, everyone here I think has been well traveled enough to have seen that food in the US broadly isn't as healthy as here, right? There are a lot of weird ingredients and additives, and this is just a fact. You can go look at the ingredients list for something in the US versus something here. And that's because the US philosophy is we will ban something once it's been proven harmful. The EU philosophy is that we will not allow something until it's been proven safe, right? So for the things that I eat, I actually much prefer the EU philosophy. It's very, very good for us, because otherwise, capitalism runs amok, I think. But for business, when you apply this to AI, for example, then we're trying to fix something that's not broken yet. Wait until it's broken before you fix it. And so this heavily limits us. And so on the broader regulation subject, I think that you really have to discuss AI.
One thing to add also to the legislation discussion, and it's complicated, and especially for small companies, it's complicated. And one of the things I read, I think last week, was that big tech companies are having a lobby to create complicated legislation to kill the competition, because only they can afford to have the legal guys in the company to be compliant and none of the others. Well, I'm not sure how true it is, but I can imagine the incentive that is there to work that way. And it's also known for other big techs that take such measures to complicate the competition. And if those kind of things happen, I have a serious problem with it. Furthermore, I think the intention behind all these laws are right. We need it in Europe. It helps us, but it also creates another playing field when services are available only in some places and not in Europe. I think we can live with.
But one thing, right? I mean, the situation that we've created now also with cybersecurity is that basically you can take a product into the US until you kind of get sued, to be in years from now. But in Europe, you first have to prove that it's a good product, which from my personal point of view, also driving a car, I'm very happy with that kind of extra security and safety. But if you talk about, let's say, your risk appetite in terms of innovation, yeah, so you should probably first start actually developing for the US. Because there you can get much easier access for the time being.
Okay, but then but if you start developing for the US, you need to go to the US. and that drives us away, you know. But the whole thing is also regarding, you know, the incentives for big companies, less subsidy, etc., etc., etc. There's always a caveat. There's always a way to cheat it, and also regarding regulation. And can we live without regulation? I don't think so. If you look at the space that we're in, you know, the quantum threat and the things that we need to do to take care of that. In the US, you know, Biden sent out a call and they made some concrete steps at certain dates. Every government agency has to do something, and the same thing in Europe kind of like happened, but that statement in Europe was, you need to do something somewhere in time, you know, and that's the whole difference. If we need to act, it's going way faster and more concrete in the US, and in Europe it's kind of like, yeah, maybe we need to have another conversation about it and let's see what we can do. And that's really not helping. So, and we need the regulation, but we need it faster in that sense.
Oh, yeah.
Very short. There is still some business opportunity from these sorts of challenges because the EU AI Act, for example, American companies can't really interpret it, and European companies can't either. But hopefully soon we'll. So, just to rewind, we find that our customers want to, or actually must, adhere to the EU AI Act rules, right? And that allows us the opportunity to say we do adhere to it. The American competitors that are using, say, OpenAI's technology are not as concerned versus us. You know, we're using Mistral, we're using others that are European-made and European compliant. So there's an opportunity there.
Maybe Olivier, from your perspective, discussion on regulation, much not regulation. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so I'm Olivier Blazy. I'm a professor in cybersecurity in École Polytechnique and in charge of the new cybersecurity program centers that we have to develop for the French government. So yeah, I mean, in terms of regulation, it's what has been said. It's a weird balance between, on one side, it's quite interesting for the consumer, and having new rules also create new opportunities, and people need to adapt, and Europe is going to adapt to Europe regulation faster, so it might create a small edge to facing American companies. But I also understand the part where American companies in the US can develop faster and innovate faster. And it's just going to be a matter of, do you want to open some kind of Pandora box and hope that you're going to be able to close it later on, which is strange. But if we take the quantum menace that is looming, in fact, we saw that the US opened a call and tried to set up deadlines to move. So the first thing is that there's been a standardization competition that happened in the US by the NIST, but in fact, if you look at candidates and the things that have been standardized, most of them are coming from Europe. So in fact, the idea and the innovation is there, and it's going to be adopted by the US. And if we look at standardization body in Europe, in fact, they were mostly looking and saying, we're going to see what the NIST is doing, and we're going to adapt and maybe pick them and not. In the end, in fact, they were in favor of a candidate that was not even a finalist, and so now they sided with the NIST and the US. So that's quite sad. And in fact, it's part of the problem is that we don't have the full chain in Europe, where we have the innovators, we have the startups that are going to develop the product, but we are lacking the part about standardization and pushing through, and we are missing those final steps. And in fact, I think that's going to be the problem. It's not, regulation is nice, but we are missing the part where we are going to try to push and promote it throughout the world and say, in fact, we are regulating because it's a good idea to do it this way and to protect this way. So yeah, so to come back to the question, regulation is nice for innovation, I think, but we are not defending it later. We are just putting it there and trying to block the US and wait.
Do you mean by that, like, it would be an opportunity as well to take some steps within implementing and standardization implementation of those regulations, especially for the SMEs, because that's I see that as a problem as well. I'm preaching for my own, of course, but that's why we actually came to exist as a foundation, and I have to explain that even if we are a not-for-profit, we actually have a service center and do things. We have actually services and servers and hardware and that kind of stuff, which is always a bit difficult to explain that you're doing more than talking here. Because of that problem of small businesses don't understanding legislation and thinking, well, how can we solve this problem together? And that togetherness, which is like made in and now maybe to the max, what if we work together because we all have the same problem? What if we have try to implement the same solution? And I think that, well, that's again reaching for for what I know it's working. I see a lot of opportunities working together there on a European level because not one single European country will win that game by itself, especially on the regulation and the implementation of those regulations on the longer term.
I would like to add, keep in mind that also if we talk about regulations and standardization, a lot is happening. I mean, also for the RED 3, which basically is a new legislation for radio equipment. I mean, the standardization process is running already for a few years and is delivering also, I think, in October or November of this year. And that's also being actually championed by some Dutch parties, in this case Philips. Not to make any advertisement there, actually. But, I mean, there's a lot happening. We may not know it, which is also maybe a problem itself, but there is a lot happening in that sense. And not only in ISO context, but also in NC context and other of the standardization bodies.
Anything else about regulation, the pros and the cons? No. So let me now come back to what I said. The link between public research and the industry, how academics can help. So I'm looking at Olivier, looking at Harold specifically. What links should be built between academics and industry to boost cybersecurity, not only to boost cybersecurity awareness, but also to help industry developing and being better positioned to sell products to customers? How do you see that? Also, can this be done at European level, or let's say not necessarily the 27 member states, but at least some cooperations between states? I mean, it's rather easy for the French government to say, okay, I'm going to design this program and to make sure that students have links with the industry, can more easily be hired by the industry and so on and so forth. It's probably also easy for the Dutch government. But I mean, in my opinion, it would make more sense if, for instance, if we had a program in France saying that we are going to make it easier for young graduates to go to the industry wherever European country they come from. So having programs in France to make it easy for a German graduate or a Dutch graduate, etc., to establish a startup or to work in a startup. Of course, I know there is the freedom of establishment, so a German guy or a Dutch person can go to France and work in France. What I'm meaning is the easiness of link between those that were at a time in the public research and the possibility to move to a startup, do it for 2 or 3 years, and possibly come back.
So, speaking for the Netherlands, I mean, that happened. I mean, if you look at the Security Matters, that was a spin-off from Eindhoven University of Technology and Twente University of Technology. And after a while, the people got kind of, well, I don't want to say fed up, but they sold the company and went back to the university. Here at CWI in Amsterdam, there are a number of people that worked for a while in a startup or a joint venture, and they kept their job partly and later on went back. So that happens on a very frequent basis. And typically, I mean, I think that Eddie will support that. We have a national set of, let's say, programs for stimulating or encouraging, let's say, and also partly funding joint research and development or innovation or whatever term you would like to use between industry, big industry, small industry, universities, University of Applied Sciences, the whole other bits of educational institutes and RTOs. And of course, also on a European level, whether it's an Horizon Europe program or Digital Europe or Eureka programs like ATIA, this happens all the time, and also on a bilateral basis. So there's also a lot of people, but that's irrespective of cybersecurity, but that have, for instance, next to the fact that they would work for EclecticIQ, they have a part-time position at a university. So that is already there. Do we use it optimally? That's maybe a different, interesting discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with this, and I mean, the situation in France is roughly the same. We can, in fact, one of the main problems for now is that academics, they are able to do startup, and so you have spin-off of some labs and universities that appear. The main problem is that you still have some kind of gap between the academic world and the industry world. And for some academics, just speaking to the industry is bad, and for others, it's just they don't know where to start. And so this is really a problem. So what we try to do, so in France we have something which is called a GDR. So it's just a national coordination body for people in cybersecurity. And so we created an event that's a 1 week period where 3 companies that we selected. Mostly it's the first 3 that contact us, and we mostly contacted by 3 every year. So that's an easy selection. They are going to present an idea to PhD students. And there are going to be 3 groups of 5 PhD students. And during 1 week, they're going to work on this idea, do lots of state of the art, and try to propose a proof of concept at the end to solve the company's problem. And so that's really a good thing for everybody, because PhD students, they discover this industry world, what is the problem, how to work in a team in a constrained time. And for the company, it's mostly free brain time for a week. And most of the time, they're very surprised and they are very pleased with the result, because their problem is going to be solved, or at least partially solved, very quickly and with innovative ideas that they really didn't think about, because they are using what has always been used before and didn't try to see the problem in a different way. And so we started this, and it was a strange experiment. We started 7 years ago, I think. And every time companies want to come back, and we try to explain that we try to rotate between them. And this is something really nice. And in fact, it would be interesting also to do that on a European scale, because it's a problem that was stated before. French companies work in France and they are very nice in a French-speaking country, and they are really bad outside. And opening students to things outside France and vice versa would be really, really interesting. So that could be a possible solution to try to enhance cooperation at the European level and bridge this gap between academic public research and industry.
Yeah, the thing is that, we're actually doing that. So we do a proof of concept together with the University of Amsterdam, when we have one of their quantum cryptography researchers who recently joined us, and we're doing a research project to see if we can build new technology with an outlook of 5 years and beyond. And by having the support from the university is really helpful in doing that, because otherwise, as a small company, you can't afford that. So it's happening, but it's not that easy, and maybe that's also has to do with the culture that's different. Like I think you mentioned it, that when you're in the US, when you're very small, you learn how to present yourself, how to think differently. And I think in the US, it's a more brutal world. It's much safer in Europe. So we are not used to fight for our lives, in a sense, or to be the first or the best or whatever. Well, we have a luxury life, and it's not in our culture, and it's safe in Europe. But the backdrop is that now we need to get those people to start thinking not from a science perspective, but also towards business, and to work harder than you're used to, because otherwise you might not have any money to make a living. And and we're not used to that. And then most of the people are saying, I'm going to go back to the university, do some science. I'm fine with that. I've got a happy life. Who cares about the money, right? So it's not. It's not just Amsterdam. It's but what we're good at is exchanging students. I think, you know, the language spoken at the university here is English, and that's for a reason, right? So that's a good thing. But now we need to take the next step in the valorization part, and we can do better in that.
Just speaking also from industry experience, I mean, so first, it is certainly true. As soon as you land in the U.S., your amygdala becomes 3 times larger, and your fight or flight instinct just starts to go nuts. So that is very, very true. I think that, you know, we spoke earlier about the national security pipeline on the continent, right? And I think that the academic to industry pipeline could be analogous, and I think this is something that the Netherlands does very well, at least from my observations. There is an organization called the Hague Security Delta, which I'm sure you guys know, that hosts a summer school. We didn't speak at it this year, but we usually do something with it. It's, you know, there are 30, 40 students usually, and they ask great questions. They do exercises, and I know for a fact many of them then move over to cybersecurity companies like Mandiant, which is an American company, and ours. So I think that's more of a hiring / talent pipeline thing. Actually integrating with some of the technological innovations, I think, is something that from my perspective, you see more of in France, and you see in Central Europe, actually, somewhat. But I think truly integrating it into business, probably something that requires a little more exploration.
Well, I would like to add 2 things, at least how we look at working with universities. Exactly like what you said, it's also part of the hiring pipeline, having somebody doing a master's project with your company. You know each other for 6 or 9 months. Which is great. Secondly, the product that you got out of it is usually you prove some idea. So it's also, and if you publish it, you can create some transparency to show the world, like, this is how we work. This is the, of course, not the deepest secrets we share, but you can share. It looks also good working together with universities. So from a marketing perspective, it's helpful. So from my point of view, and I'm always a bit surprised how less companies I do see working closely together with universities. But for us, it works great because, well, the 2 youngest guys in the company came through this process, and I hope every year we get one through this. The other notion I wanted to make, we are, and that's due to my TNO background, involved in several University of Horizon projects. So, for example, last week I was almost a whole week in Lisbon for the Starlight project, the biggest AI for law enforcement project, and I intentionally mentioned this because in this consortium, 50 partners, you have to collaborate. You are there the whole week. So you got information and knowledge on the AI Act. How does this apply in the context of law enforcement in the EU? So access to knowledge, amazing. We are TNO was there, a university from the UK is there, and we're building relations for many years now. Things to become really easy, open, and transparent. So for us, and on top of this, we got paid. The story was already good, but on top of this, we got quite some good funding to innovate and to invest in the company. So that's another, for me, kind of win-win-win, where it's not only about the funding. What I do see many companies look at this only as a funding vehicle, but for us, it's access to knowledge, it's access to network, and it's also actually access to, let's say, this European flag, where we can put our company logo next to, because we are part of this European project. And then it's also very good marketing. And I totally don't understand why so few SMEs or companies take these opportunities and see this value.
May I simply, and that's without the spreekwoordelijke veer, in a certain sense, I think you can be complimented in the sense that you, as an SME, are also a very, let's say, innovative SME. Many other SMEs just want to buy a solution and get on with it. But that's a very different attitude.
So the difference there is also long-term. We are not in this for a quick win, but because these are long-term partnerships. And then it works. Because getting into this European project in this European arena, if you want to start from scratch, take at least 2 years to get a first project. So that's the downside. But if you made the investment, it's more than just money.
I have another question to rebound on what Olivier said about this program, which lasts 1 week, so in which you put together students and companies that have a cybersecurity issue and want to know how to solve it. Is it possible that the students come from Germany, Netherlands, Spain, and so on and so forth?
So it depends. I mean, for now, no. Mostly because it's funded by the French government, so it should be open primarily to French students. But I mean, we just need to rent a place and do that. So as long as if we manage, for example, to get funding from the EU, that would be totally open to whatever student and whatever company, and that would be really great.
Of course, I understand there might be an issue about budget, because you have always, people saying, okay, but it's the money comes from France. I take the example of Polytechnique. The money comes from France, so the French taxpayer. So should it go to a Dutch student or German student and so on and so forth? So, okay. Maybe there is a workaround is to say, okay, we put together TU Eindhoven and Polytechnique, and we say it's open at least at Netherlands and France scale, because then, okay, there will be always someone saying, but okay, France has paid more than the Netherlands, or the reverse, but maybe it can be sorted out. Shouldn't we try to promote this kind of joint programs to create this easiness of link between researchers, students, and the industry, the companies?
Actually, given the fact that IP Paris and also TU Eindhoven are both member of the Eurotech University.
Yes, I know that.
In which that already happens. At least there was a proposal. Didn't make it in the first round, but okay, we can always retry.
Okay, so it's a question of pushing now.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. We will try to push all together. And also another story I had in mind is about summer schools. We have summer schools in cybersecurity. I'm sure there are summer schools in the Netherlands about that. But to me, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know enough. In my opinion, it sounds a little as researchers' summer school. Why not extend that to, of course, should be an element of choice. Let's say the CTOs of some cyber security companies. I mean, people that really can bring value when you talk of innovation, new technology, use of AI, for instance, and so on and so forth.
What you see in Germany and also in the Netherlands, and maybe it's also in France, I don't know, but in Germany you have the Charter of Trust, which is a organization, business-to-business organization of a lot of German industry, which basically does exactly the same what you just proposed, but then for its member. In the Netherlands, you have a number of what we call circles of trust. All just needs to have a name, of course. Where you typically see it's a kind of association of companies, typically either CTOs or CIOs, CISOs, people that are on, let's say, cybersecurity, information security, everything related to that. They often discuss, let's say, real threat intel, but also try to, let's say, simply raise the average level of the people in that circle of trust by means of, let's say, a serious gaming and all kinds of exercises. And there is also, at least in the Netherlands, but I think that Eddie knows much more about it than I do, a national exercise, Easy Door or something like that, which basically everybody can participate in.
So how can we push that together? First, I would say there is an element of knowledge. Frankly speaking, I do not say I know everything in cybersecurity, certainly not.
Oh, Dominique,
but I am not aware of half of what you have both said.
That's why we need something extra in Europe. Maybe we should try to go for a European university on cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Olivier knows, I think.
No, but I'm immediately thinking of all the roadblocks. But
no gain.
Yeah, sure. Maybe it can be at least a program for, past master.
Yeah, a doctorate
for
program.
doctors.
Or for people who work in industry, professional learning type of organizations.
Yeah, that could
and
be
with
done
industry
together, yes.
Instead of not just next to industry, but with industry. There is for any good idea, there's money enough.
Yeah, I have the same actually. Just on the matter of financing, I was just as a panel with a question back to the public. Like, would it be appetite for what you see happening as for this kind of initiatives, which is really knowledge sharing based? It's the expectation always that Europe or the national government should participate or fund because like public, you know. But there is almost never appetite from private money to participate in this. I'm really wondering.
Isn't Circle of Trust mostly private?
Yes, and
Or
also
all
if you look
private?
at the PCSI program that TNO has together with a few banks, it's privately funded.
Yeah.
By banks, of course, so that's also our money. But still, I mean, it is funded by the organizations.
Yeah, no, that program is funded by the banks indeed. I worked at ABN AMRO at the time, and I'm aware of the program, but that was kind of like the last of its kind. So we tried to get new ones in, and the appetite from the banks was zero.
It's very interesting. So I've lived in this country for 5 years, right? But I am still what I would view as an outsider and a guest, you know, for now. And I think that it is very interesting because there are actually some U.S. models for some of these things, right? So for a European university, going back to National Security Pipeline, if you look at the LinkedIn or the resumes of a lot of U.S. executives in cybersecurity, you'll see Naval Postgraduate School, right? So you probably could build something like that here, and I think that would be very, very interesting. But then, of course, you have to debate: is it in France? Is it in NL? Is it, and that's going to take I don't know how long. But I think that would be very interesting. And there are also models for the private sector. So just to be clear, often the U.S. is learning from the EU about these models, right? But this is one such example where it could be in the reverse. Because I'm sure everyone recalls, there was a financial crisis in 2008, and some U.S. banks went under, and so those banks decided, actually financial institutions, because Fannie Mae, for example, is not a bank, they decided that they would form something called the FSARC, the Financial Services Analysis Risk Center, or something like that. And that was because they had decided that these 12 or so financial institutions, they were so big that if they were to fail, they would pose a systemic risk to the U.S. economy, and let's be honest, the global economy. And that's also true for probably most of the larger Western European institutions. So that is a mostly cyber-focused organization that still exists, that is funded by the banks for the banks to protect themselves.
The same also the international ISACs. They're also paid by the members, and as far as I understood, also the one on Semicon, for instance, I know what some Dutch companies are paying for it. I mean, it's 6 zeros. So I think if you need to have a good idea, then the money will be there.
I had also a question about patterns, but oh, sorry. I had a question about patterns, but I prefer to jump to another type of question. It's to come back to companies. We have seen last in Cyber Forum, so it's where French cybersecurity, mostly vendors, gather. It's in Lille every year by the end of winter or beginning of spring. We have seen at that time a flavor of consolidation in Europe. Elements were the takeover by Airbus of Infodas, which is a mid-sized cybersecurity company, German one. So Airbus is now the owner of two mid-size, I would say. Mid-size by the European standard, not by the American standard. It's still small size companies. That's Storm Shield, which is something like 75 million euros revenues, and Infodas, which is probably lower, probably in the range of 50. Then we had the merge or the acquisition of the French VADE, which is about email security, by the German company Hornet Security. Together, they are in the range of 100 million euros. Strangely enough, that takeover of the French VADE by a German company was criticized in France. Not by the state, for once. It was not Percy, the French Minister of Economics saying, oh, no, it was the press, the people, you and me, anyone in the audience saying, German takeover of a French company. To me, it makes no sense, this criticism. I mean, because if you want to compete let's say, to compete with our American friends, the proper scale is Europe. At the national scale, the national market in France is not big enough to nurture the R&D that a cybersecurity company need. Same for Germany, even if Germany is a bigger market. The proper scale is Europe. But so far, consolidation is working very slowly. I would like to ask the question first to Cody, because he's the man of the company in the room. Is it something I am not going to ask you for some secret plans, Cody? But I mean, from a business point of view, as a CEO, what's your point of view on M&A? Is something that should be considered, maybe not now, but next year or the year after?
There we go. There are quite a few layers to that, and I think first, naturally that consolidation could be with U.S. companies, so beware of that. That's really a natural path for some segments, so it doesn't really solve the root of the problem that you're asking about. But I think that from our perspective, and indeed without revealing secrets, somebody mentioned on the earlier panel, I think it was actually Sylvia, that there are, every CISO has 70, 75 vendors that he or she has to manage. And so I think that just from our segment's perspective, we will see more consolidation. We're also seeing some of the fallout from the low interest rate environment, where a lot of companies are being absorbed by private equity, or they raised too much money, so that's kind of more of a symptom. And I think strategically, when you are in one of those 75 vendors, it probably does make sense to consider rolling up, right? So if you are, let's say, you're a segment where you have 5 to 7 medium-sized players or even small players, I'm not going to say threat intelligence, but an adjacency, and you're all competing against each other, and one person or one vendor offers free services for infrastructure configuration on procurement, then we all have to offer free services, right? If you roll up, then you can start to have more control over your revenue strategy there. And I think you're going to see some of that, and I think that's helpful for everyone in that segment. I think from a European perspective, when competing against Americans or Asians, I do think that the roll-up strategy can make European companies stronger together. But I think that the very fact that you showed some very mild frustration that there was some criticism about Germany versus France, I think illustrates the root of the challenge, which is that in France we have some French customers, but it's a bit harder to sell there because we have a French competitor. So everyone in France wants the French vendor. So I think until that challenge of unity is not solved, because you never solve such things, but is mitigated further, I think that it's going to be hard. And I think that what we're seeing with the theme here is that the European Union, not to get political, but the European Union is, I think, largely an economic, financial, and monetary union. It is not a federal state, and I think you're seeing the symptoms of that just time and again.
I agree completely. And also coming back to what you said, I think that it's a little bit similar to what happened here in the Netherlands when Fox IT was kind of taken over by NCC Group in the UK. I don't know if that was still in the EU back then, but given the fact that, but they are no longer. So if you then have a company that is basically has a central role also in the cybersecurity of your government, and then suddenly that company is no longer in the decision power of that country, yeah, you will see that people will respond to that. And in some countries, because of historical reasons, they will probably shout quicker or more adamant, but I still think that these kind of things will play a role in Europe for a long time. And it has to do also with where's the data going, who has access to it, and I think also what could happen next. Because what a lot of people are, let's say, afraid of, let's call it the elephant in the room, but let's say if you have a company now that you do business with, tomorrow it could be Chinese. What happens with the data then? And as soon as you give it completely freedom to license to basically operate or sell itself, yeah, you get some people that get very, very itchy.
Thank you. Harold. I think with regards to Cody's remark on the state of the European collaboration, which is mainly economic, it's not federalized. So we also don't have a national security unity in Europe. That's underlying your remark as well. So that creates a different culture than if we would have been there. And I think that's both the security and the economic side. To keep it in balance in Europe is completely different than in other countries like America.
Thank you.
Yeah, but to come back to the story of Airbus, I have been very tiny part of the story of Airbus in the 90s. If you remember, by 1990, you had a big UK company, which was British Aerospace. You had two space and aircraft making companies in France, Matra and Aerospatiale. You had in Germany the beginning of different companies such as Daimler Aerospace and so on and so forth that merged into Dutch Aerospace. All these companies knew that they were already working together because they were not able to make everything in a single company. So they had a motion, they had a push to work together for a very simple reason. So what happened is that these companies began to think maybe for simply because we have a competitor which is Boeing, we cannot compete each of us with Boeing. We are not big enough. We have not money enough for R&D. So maybe we should do something together. And then they discussed with the different governments. In fact, it was the industry that created the move. It was not the states. So the states were good enough to understand that it was in the common interest to do that. So I always think that business has to start somewhere. I mean, okay, I'm sure I will hear many speeches. I have heard already many, but I will still hear, I hope, many speeches coming from the different states. But it's always, double speech, double, I don't know how you say that in English, tongue in the cheek or something like that. Because the French government will always say we want to develop European sovereignty, but in fact they say, well, I want to give the money to French companies and not to the Dutch or the German ones. So the industry has to move first, in a sense.
To respond, this wouldn't happen with the airline company, the aircraft companies, if Boeing wasn't there. So it's a market mechanism, and in order to respond to the question, like, do you have to buy 5 products instead of one? At least what we try to do with a few companies in Europe is, let's say, align APIs, such that you can have different backends with different, let's say, data sets that you can request, but build a single interface for the end customer. such that it's easier to buy, and you can buy the product of the colleagues. If the Dutch government would like to buy it, they can get all the other products as well in one procurement, where the products are aligned and we all work on our specialty in the back ends, in special algorithms, analytics, etc. And that's where I think, but this is also due to collaboration, we can make a difference, but it's a long way. And I think that was the same in the aerospace, because these companies start to, let's say, build interfaces between the different elements, wings, and this is ongoing in the cyberspace as well.
That's a very interesting remark, that this wouldn't happen without Boeing, and very interesting because I think everyone in cybersecurity industry knows that Microsoft is beginning to really become that, right? And you could say there are a few others, and I don't really have a prediction for where that'll lead, because we've seen that it doesn't necessarily mean that an Airbus forms anymore, right? But although it may still, who knows? But something that I found very intriguing is I have some friends at Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Amazon recognized this challenge, right? Amazon seems to have seen this coming, because what they're doing is they have created the European sovereign cloud. And Amazon is very aggressive in Europe. I'm not sure if it's visible yet, but behind the scenes, they're very serious, where they want to simply play by the European rules. So they're going to follow all of the regulations. They're going to host everything here. And they want to own Europe the way they own the US. We will join you with that, Cybus.
That's what I was thinking, because they are both wavelength and particles. So maybe I know there was a question raised by Octavia about use open source, promotion of open source as a tool of sovereignty, but maybe we can leave that for the informal discussion. Okay, so maybe we should stop now.
It was the most interesting. We were just talking about sovereignty and, making stuff instead of buying everything in. And if you say open, everybody's just looking very scared. I don't know why. Yeah. We're back to the same.
So my problem is not with the open, but my problem is that we have a lot of open source crap that a lot of people say, oh, it's open source, so everybody will review it, which of course never happens.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with that. If it's everybody's, it's nobody's. No. That's why I think there are solutions for that, in which you would actually create a framework within Europe with entities like we could be one of those, or someone who actually manages that. So open doesn't mean leave it there. I always say open source is very sad, because it's like orphan. It's orphan software. Nobody cares for it. But it could be. It could be. Well, just to finish on a more. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and we will let the quantum computing guys enter.